The white mare stood perfectly still in the meadow outside Thunder Creek, her pale coat catching the last rays of sunlight like polished ivory. The Arizona sky bled copper and violet as evening descended, casting long shadows across the scattered wooden cabins that comprised the settlement. The air carried the scent of dust pine resin and the faint metallic promise of distant rain. September 14th, 1880. A date that would mark the beginning of everything. Charlotte Byrne Lottie, to the few who still spoke her name without contempt, sat sideways in the worn saddle, one hand gripping the pommel until her knuckles turned white. Her other hand pressed against her ribs, where each breath sent sharp pain radiating through her chest. Her cotton blouse, once white but now gray with dust and sweat, hung torn at the shoulder, exposing a bruise that spread like spilled ink across pale skin. Another bruise darkened her left cheek, the distinct shape of knuckles still visible. Her honey-colored hair had come loose from its pins and fell in tangled strands across her face, some matted with dried blood from a split near her hairline. She was 18 years old, though the haunted look in her green eyes suggested someone who had lived far longer. Chogan of the White Mountain Apache moved without sound, his moccasins barely disturbing the dry grass. 25 winters had honed him into a man of lean strength and quiet intensity. His dark hair was tied back with rawhide, and a pale scar crossed his left shoulder, a cavalry bullet's reminder from a skirmish near the Black River. He wore buckskin leggings, a faded cotton shirt, and a leather vest decorated with simple beadwork his mother had sewn before consumption took her on the San Carlos reservation. He placed one calloused hand on the mare's warm neck, steadying the animal, then reached up to slide his arm carefully around Lottie's ribs, avoiding the fresh welt that striped her side. He lifted her weight with practiced ease. She flinched not from him, but from the pain, and bit her lip hard enough to draw blood to keep from crying out. Behind them, perhaps 100 yards across the open ground, the wooden cabins glowed orange with lamplight. Shadows moved behind greased paper windows, and figures gathered in doorways, men in work shirts and suspenders, women clutching shawls, all drawn by the sight unfolding before them. An Apache warrior and a white woman. The sight violated every unspoken law of the territory. Whispers carried on the wind. "That's Ernest Byrne's girl. What's that savage doing? Someone fetch Sheriff Trammell." The voices rose angry and afraid. Chogan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "You ride with me now," he said to Lottie, his English accented but clear. "Breathe slow. We have far to go before they organize." Lottie nodded, unable to speak, past the tightness in her throat. A ranch hand named Dooley stepped forward, coiling a hemp rope in his thick hands. He was a heavy-set man with a sun-ravaged face and small, mean eyes. "Hold on there, Indian," he called out. "Where you reckon you're taking her, that girl belongs here." Other men moved forward, emboldened. Chogan did not answer. He turned the mare smoothly, positioning his body between Lottie and the gathering crowd. He touched his heels to the horse's flanks, and the mare moved forward at a walk that became a trot. "Stop him," someone shouted. "He's stealing her." Dooley raised the rope arm, cocking back, but Chogan's hand moved deliberately to the bone-handled knife at his belt. The gesture needed no words. Dooley hesitated, courage faltering. The mare broke into a canter hooves, throwing up dust. The shouts grew louder, but Chogan did not look back. He guided the horse toward the tree line, where ponderosa pine stood black against the darkening sky. Lottie felt wind against her face, carrying scents of pine and grass and freedom. She glanced back once and saw the figures growing smaller, their angry voices fading. For the first time in longer than she could remember, longer than the 8 months since her father's death, longer than the 3 years of Mary's cruelty, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope, fragile as spider silk, but real. Ernest Byrne had been a stonemason from the Scottish Highlands, a man with broad scarred hands and an eye for how rocks fit together. He had emigrated in 1870, driven by the promise of land ownership impossible back home. By 1875, he had filed a Homestead Act claim for 40 acres along Thunder Creek. The land was not rich soil, thin and rocky, but the creek ran clear and strong, making it valuable. Water was life in Arizona territory. Ernest built a cabin with his own hands, using logs from the forest and stones from the creek bed. He dug a well-planted garden with Kansas seeds, raised a small barn. His first wife, Margaret, had died giving birth to Lottie in Kansas in 1862. Ernest raised the girl alone, teaching her to read, using a worn Bible to recognize constellations, to value honest work and keeping promises. In 1877, he married Mary Kane, a widow from a Blackthorn church social. Mary seemed practical, capable qualities Ernest valued. What he did not know was that Mary's first husband, Walter Kane, still lived running a freight business in Mercury Falls under the name Walter Keene. Mary arrived with sharp eyes and a leather-bound ledger. Within months, warmth drained from the cabin like water from cracked clay. She kept meticulous accounts, every chore timed, every expense recorded, every failure noted. When Lottie could not meet impossible standards, the willow switch came down. Sometimes a leather belt. Sometimes Mary bound Lottie's wrists with rawhide and locked her in the shed where rats scurried in darkness and cold seeped into bones. Ernest had not known the full extent. He worked long hours at the Red Lode mine trying to pay debts Mary claimed were mounting. He trusted his wife. That trust was poison. Last January, on a morning when frost coated every surface, a timber support in the mine cracked. Later investigation would reveal saw marks hidden beneath tar, deliberate sabotage. Roman Beckett had ordered it, eliminating workers who asked too many questions about safety or back pay. But that truth would not surface for months. The beam struck Ernest across the chest, crushing ribs and puncturing a lung. They carried him to the surface still alive, but drowning in his own blood. Dr. Ruth Hanley arrived from Mercury Falls too late to do more than administer laudanum. Ernest gripped Lottie's hand with failing strength. "Keep the land," he whispered, pink foam on his lips. "Promise me, lass." The deed, hidden, saddle tree hollow, papers there. "She cannot." His voice faded to wet rattles. Lottie promised through tears, not understanding. Ernest died before noon, his body carried down the mountain on a wagon. Roman Beckett was a silver-haired man in his 50s who owned the mine, a stamp mill processing ore, with mercury amalgamation freight contracts and water diversions. When Mary came for the standard $50 death compensation, Beckett leaned back in his leather chair and smiled through cigar smoke. "I'm afraid there's no employment record, Mrs. Byrne," he said smoothly. "No contract, no payroll entry. Without documentation, I cannot authorize payment. Policy, you understand." Mary left empty-handed, rage barely concealed. Beckett's refusal was calculated. He wanted the Byrne homestead, specifically the water rights. Thunder Creek fed his stamp mill operations. Control of the upper creek meant expansion without interference from small landholders complaining about poisoned water or dry wells. Mary, desperate and calculating, began making plans. In those plans, Lottie was merely a commodity. The homestead became a prison of endless labor and whispered fears. Mary ruled with military precision. The ledger sat on the kitchen table pages, filled with cramped handwriting chore lists, with times-noted debt tallies real and imagined failure notations with corresponding punishments. Lottie's days began before the rooster crowed. Hauling water from the creek, now a muddy trickle leaving metallic taste and sediment, took hours. Buckets were heavy enough to blister hands and make shoulders scream. feeding chickens, milking the cow with cramping fingers, scrubbing floors on hands and knees with lye soap that burned skin raw, mending clothes by candlelight, until eyes burned preparing meals Mary inspected with cold criticism. By nightfall, Lottie was so exhausted she could barely stand, hands blistered back, aching spirit crushed. When she failed, bread not rising because Mary refused to buy fresh yeast garden rows, not straight enough, moving too slowly, because bruised ribs made breathing agony, punishment was swift. The willow switch hung by the door as constant reminder. Sometimes rawhide bindings cut circulation and left marks for days. Sometimes the shed where rats scurried and cold penetrated to the bone. Lottie learned not to cry. Tears made it worse. Silence and submission were her only shields. Her half-brother Zephyr, Mary's son, was 6 years old. Small and pale with blonde hair, he coughed constantly, a dry hack that left blood flecks on handkerchiefs. Dr. Ruth Hanley had ridden out 3 weeks ago. Dr. Ruth was one of the territory's few female physicians trained by her father in Philadelphia before coming west seeking a place where her skills outweighed her gender. She was brisk and unsentimental, but her hands were gentle with patience. She had listened to Zephyr's chest with her wooden stethoscope, frowning deeply. Then she walked to the creek, filled a tin cup, and tasted it. Her expression darkened immediately. She spat the water into dirt. "Contaminated," she said bluntly. "Mercury most likely, plus arsenic and other ore processing residues. Beckett's stamp mill uses mercury amalgamation, efficient but filthy. Runoff goes straight into the creek. If the boy's been drinking this for months, no wonder he's sick. Mercury accumulates in the body, damages lungs, nervous system, kidneys. Could kill him." Mary waved dismissively. "We've got no other source. The well's nearly dry." "Then boil it," Dr. Ruth snapped. "Won't remove mercury, but kills some bacterial contaminants. And keep him away from the creek entirely." She paused. "Better yet, file a complaint with the territorial engineer. Beckett can't poison public waterways without consequence." But Mary did nothing. The real problem was that Thunder Creek had been reduced to a trickle. Beckett's men had dug a diversion ditch 2 miles upstream, rerouting most water to his stamp mill through a wooden flume. The mill operated ceaselessly, iron hammers pounding ore to dust with sounds like distant thunder. The creek below ran cloudy with sediment and chemicals taking on an opalescent sheen like spilled oil. Lottie watched the garden die. Tomatoes shriveled skins tough and bitter. Corn grew stunted yellow stalks barely waist high. Hay turned brittle, useless. The 3 cows grew skeletal ribs, showing milk production dropping. Chickens laid fewer eggs with shells so thin they cracked at the slightest touch. The old mule moved slowly, energy-sapped eyes dull. She had begged Ernest to complain, to take it to territorial court. But he had been too tired, too worn down. By the time he understood Beckett was systematically destroying small landholders, it was too late. Chogan had been born in the high country near the White Mountains, where ponderosa pines grew so thick the forest floor was carpeted with needles and the air smelled perpetually of resin and altitude. The White Mountain Apache had lived there for generations, beyond counting, following seasonal patterns of game and water. His father Neol died in 1878 when Chogan was 16. Cavalry soldiers pursued Apache, who had left San Carlos Reservation refusing to starve on land that could not sustain them. Neol took a bullet to the chest, fired by a young lieutenant who later received a commendation. Neol died in minutes while his son watched from hiding, forced to remain silent. Chogan's mother died 2 winters later on the reservation, worn down by malnutrition and grief. At 18, Chogan left the reservation, unwilling to watch his people starve under corrupt Indian agent Tully, who sold their rations for profit. He survived by hunting trading pelts, scouting for travelers. He was careful Apache men caught outside reservations were shot on sight by some settlers, hanged by vigilante groups, or returned in chains to face severe punishment as examples. His aunt Ayana had stayed off the reservation by staying hidden. She lived with her 15-year-old son Nidus in a camp near Bear Creek. Ayana was in her 50s, face lined by hardship, but her knowledge of the land was profound. 6 weeks before meeting Lottie, Ayana showed Chogan dead fish on the creek bank. Bellies, swollen gills, crusted white. "Poison," she said in Apache. "From the white man's mill. Same poison that killed Ernest Byrne." Nidus coughed the same sound as Zephyr's cough. The boy's face was pale body, too thin despite Ayana's best efforts. Cold anger settled in Chogan's chest. He began watching the valley, carefully observing Beckett's operations, the freight wagons, the riders intimidating small ranchers. In the process, he saw Lottie. Early September, Mary sent Lottie to the trading post for salt. Lottie hitched the old mule to a wagon, moving slowly, because her ribs were bruised from a beating. 2 days earlier, Mary had struck her with a wooden spoon for burning beans, then kicked her when she fell. She wore a simple homespun skirt and faded calico blouse, both heavily patched. Her hair was pinned tight, though strands escaped, clinging to her sweaty forehead. The trading post's shelves held barrels of flour and sugar bolts of cloth lanterns, kegs of nails, coils of rope, and canned goods from the railhead. Proprietor Ike Dalton was fair, but drove hard bargains and extended no credit. Lottie traded 2 eggs for thread and a salt packet, mentally tallying what Mary would say, what punishment might come if the trade was judged wasteful. Stepping onto the boardwalk, she nearly collided with 2 men Beckett's men identified by red bandanas. Sykes had a greasy hat and missing teeth. Dutch was younger, laughing at everything Sykes said. "Well, well," Sykes drawled, blocking her path. "Ernest Burns, girl. Heard your pa got crushed in the mine. Real shame. Heard Beckett didn't pay your ma neither. Hard times, I reckon." Lottie kept her eyes down, trying to pass. Sykes stepped in front of her. "Where you rushing to? Come have a drink." "No, thank you," Lottie said quietly. Sykes grabbed her arm, fingers digging hard. "Wasn't asking, girl." Then a shadow fell across them. Chogan had crossed the street in 3 strides. He stepped between them, presence radiating controlled danger. "You got business, Indian." Sykes sneered, hand twitching toward his pistol. Chogan's hand rested on his knife hilt. He did not draw it. His dark eyes held Sykes's gaze without wavering. "Let her go." Sykes stared and then released Lottie and spat. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but not today." Sykes and Dutch mounted and rode off, forced laughter echoing. Lottie stood trembling, heart pounding. She looked up at Chogan and saw not a threat, but someone who had chosen to help when no one else would. "Thank you," she said, voice shaking. Chogan nodded once. Then he lifted a heavy nail jar from the boardwalk and placed it in her wagon, a small, practical gesture without expectation. Lottie drove away, but glanced back. Chogan still watched, making sure Sykes did not return. That moment was the first thread of trust. In a land where trust was rare as water in drought, that thread was more valuable than gold. Mary calculated value with merchant's precision. After Ernest's death, the homestead became an anchor. She needed money quickly. 6 weeks after the funeral, Beckett's clerk, Finch, approached her. He was narrow-faced with pale eyes and a perpetual sneer smelling of bay rum and expensive cigars. They sat in the kitchen while he spread papers. "There are men in this territory," Finch said, tapping documents with manicured fingers. "Men with money who need wives, or at least women to manage households. We arrange these matches through a broker network running from Deadwood to El Paso. Legal, all proper. Mary listened without expression. Women sign contracts. They go to the man who paid. Woman gets security food protection. Everyone benefits. What do I get? Mary asked coldly. Finch smiled reptilian. $50. Gold coin, paid when she leaves. Lottie stood hidden in the doorway, listening, feeling betrayal settle like a funeral shroud. Mary signed that night, listing Charlotte Byrne as housekeeper bride for Clayton Howell at Devil's Elbow, a remote spot where law was fiction and women disappeared without questions. 3 days later, September 14th, Copper Jim arrived. Copper Jim was Beckett's foreman, mid-40s, with a face like cracked leather and eyes like dirty ice. He wore a sweat-stained hat, leather vest, and a Colt revolver. He drove a freight wagon pulled by 2 draft horses, rope and canvas tarp tied in back. He arrived just before sunset. Mary stepped onto the porch. She ready? She will be. Lottie had been in the garden pulling weeds. She heard the wagon and knew. She ran. She made it to the pine trees before Copper Jim caught her. He grabbed her arm and slapped her hard enough to knock her down, blood filling her mouth from a split lip. Zephyr stood in the yard. Lottie? He cried desperately. Mary did not move. Copper Jim pulled rawhide from his belt and bound Lottie's wrists painfully tight. Get in the wagon. Lottie struggled, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the wagon, and she knew once inside she would be gone forever. Then hoofbeats. Chogan emerged from the pines on the white mare. He had watched the homestead for days, uneasy about the clerk's visit, the papers, Mary's calculating energy. When he saw the freight wagon, he understood. He rode into the yard and dismounted smoothly. His eyes took in everything: Lottie bleeding on the ground, wrists bound, Copper Jim standing over her, Mary on the porch, Zephyr crying. The paper means nothing, Chogan said steadily. She did not sign it. She did not consent. Copper Jim turned hand, moving to his revolver. You got no say, Indian. This is legal business. Clear out before I put a bullet in you. It is her choice, Chogan said. He drew his knife, 6 inches of sharp steel. Not yours, not her stepmother's. You threatening me? I am freeing her. You want to stop me, you will have to kill me. And if you kill me, my people will know. They will remember. It was calculated, invoking the fear that still haunted settlements despite military campaigns. Apache had reputations for long memories and vengeance that could reach across years and miles. Copper Jim hesitated, calculating risks. Killing an Apache before witnesses could bring retaliation from mountain bands. Chogan stepped forward, knelt, and cut the rawhide bindings in one clean motion. He pulled Lottie to her feet. Mary, Lottie called out, unable to help herself. What about Zephyr? Mary's face remained stone. He'll be fine. You made your choice. Don't come back. Chogan lifted Lottie onto the mare and swung up behind her arm, circling her waist protectively. Behind them, Copper Jim drew his Colt. The revolver barked, once bullet whining past Chogan's head, close enough to rustle pine needles. The mare lunged forward. Another shot and then another, but they were already moving too fast in fading light. They rode into darkness, leaving Thunder Creek behind. They rode through the night, the mare's hooves drumming on narrow game trails. Lottie's ribs ached with every jolt. She gripped the saddle horn body, rigid with exhaustion and shock. Chogan focused on the trail, scanning for obstacles, loose rocks, low branches, steep drops. Behind them, faint on the wind, came the baying of hounds. Beckett's men had wasted no time. By now, posters would be going up, $100 reward, white girl kidnapped by Indian. They rode for hours, landscape shifting from pine forest to rolling grassland. The air grew colder. Lottie's shivered torn blouse offering little protection. Near dawn, Chogan halted by juniper trees. He removed his wool serape heavy blanket woven with red and brown stripes and wrapped it around Lottie's shoulders. "I can't take this," she protested. "You'll freeze. You need it more," Chogan said simply. "I know this cold." Lottie pulled it tight, feeling warmth seep in. She watched Chogan check the mare's hooves, methodically running hands down each leg. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Chogan glanced at her. "Do not thank me yet. We are not safe. We will not be safe for days, maybe weeks." They mounted and continued. As the sun rose, they reached Thunder Creek itself, off the actual waterway. The crossing was shallow, but the current ran fast and cold over smooth stones. Chogan urged the mare into the water. The horse hesitated, testing it, then stepped in. Water rose quickly, soaking through their clothes. The cold was shocking, stealing breath. Halfway across, the mare stumbled. Her hoofs slipped on a submerged rock slick with algae. The horse lurched sideways, and Lottie pitched forward with a cry, losing her grip. Chogan's arms shot out, catching her around the waist and pulling her back against his chest with surprising strength. For a moment, they were pressed together, her heart hammering his breath warm against her neck, despite the icy water. "Hold on," he murmured, steady and calm. "Almost there. Do not let go." The mare regained footing and lunged forward, scrambling up the muddy bank. Chogan dismounted and reached up to help Lottie down, hands lingering at her waist to ensure she was steady. She looked up at him, face pale, lips tinged blue. "You saved me. Again." "You saved yourself," Chogan replied quietly. "You chose to run. You chose to fight. I only gave you the chance to choose." They stood, dripping the sound of distant hounds, a reminder they had no time. Chogan led the mare into tree cover, and Lottie followed. Ayana's camp was hidden among ponderosa pines on a hillside, wiki-ups, covered with brush and hides blending seamlessly into landscape. The fire pit was dug into earth, lined with heat-retaining stones, designed for smokeless, burning generations of technique to avoid detection. Ayana and Nidis were waiting. Ayana's sharp eyes took in Lottie's bruised face, torn clothing, careful breathing. She said nothing, just motioned Lottie to sit by the fire. Nidis moved to unsaddle the mare. Ayana brewed willow bark tea, boiling water in a copper pot. She poured it into a tin cup and handed it to Lottie, who drank slowly, feeling pain ease. Ayana then examined Lottie's ribs through the wet fabric, checking for breaks. Finding none, she bound them with cloth strips in a figure-8 pattern, providing support without restricting breathing too much. "You will heal," Ayana said in accented English. "But you must rest. No running, no heavy work, 2 weeks minimum." Lottie nodded, too exhausted to speak. Chogan sat apart Winchester carbine across his knees. It was a model 1873 in 44-40 he had taken from a dead soldier years ago. He checked the mechanism carefully, despite the creek crossing ensuring functionality. He knew the posse would come. Bison Bill thrived on situations like this, an Apache and a white woman, a story to twist into something dark, justifying any violence. The reward money was just excuse. What Bill wanted was spectacle, power, satisfaction of leading a mob. By the second day, September 16th, the posse found their trail. Bison Bill was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a thick gray-streaked beard and a voice that carried like a bullhorn. He had built his reputation organizing vigilante actions against rustlers and claim jumpers. He wore a snakeskin banded hat, silver concho-decorated vest, and matching revolvers, expensive weapons he was eager to use. He led a dozen men on horses ranging from sturdy ranch animals to half-wild Mustangs. Among them, Copper Jim nursing a grudge, Tucker a skilled tracker, Sykes and Dutch eager for revenge, and others drawn by reward money. Tucker dismounted near the creek crossing, studying the muddy bank. He saw hoof prints deeper on one side, where the mare stumbled, scuff marks where Chogan helped Lottie down. "Crossed here," Tucker said, pointing. 8–10 hours ahead, heading northeast toward high country, girls slowing them. "We push hard, we catch them." "Then we push," Bison Bill declared, voice booming. "That Indian's got no right taking a white woman. We'll string him up, teach every Apache in the territory a lesson. Bring the girl back safe, make sure she knows her place." The posse rode on, voices loud, 3 bloodhounds baying constantly, an ominous sound echoing through valleys. Chogan heard them long before they arrived. His ears, trained by years of hunting and evading patrols, picked up sounds that did not belong: distant barking, harness jangle, occasional shouts. He estimated they were 2 hours behind, moving faster than hoped. He made a decision. Staying at Ayana's camp would endanger her and Nidis. If the posse found them harboring fugitives, they would face arrest or worse. He chose a limestone arroyo a mile east, a narrow, dry gully with high walls providing cover and limiting attack directions. The bottom was sandy with scrub brush and scattered boulders. Chogan positioned Lottie and Ayana in a shallow depression at the wall's base, a natural hollow worn by flash floods. He covered them with branches and dirt to break up their outlines, making them nearly invisible from above. Nidis crouched behind a large boulder, hunting knife in hand. Chogan climbed to the rim and lay flat, carbine aimed at the trail below. He saw riders approaching, silhouettes dark against pale sky. Bison Bill rode a large roan posture, arrogant voice, carrying as he shouted orders. Tucker dismounted and studied the ground with methodical care, moving closer to the arroyo edge, about 40 feet away. Chogan moved silently back into the arroyo, positioning himself beside Lottie. He guided her hands to the carbine barrel, placing her finger near the trigger, his hand covering hers. "Listen carefully," he whispered, breath warm against her ear. "Fire at those rocks." He pointed 20 feet from Tucker, not at the man. "Understand? Just scare him. The gun will kick, but I am holding it with you." Lottie's hands shook, heart pounding, but she nodded. She aimed at the indicated rocks and squeezed gently. The carbine barked, sound sharp and deafening, echoing off limestone walls. The bullet ricocheted with a crack and stone spray. Tucker yelped and scrambled backward, sliding down the slope in dust. Riders wheeled their horses, shouting confusion, firing blindly into the arroyo. Bullets whined off walls, kicking up sand. Chogan pulled Lottie down, covering her body with his, pressing her into sand. She felt his heart beating against her back, steady despite chaos. After a long moment, firing stopped and retreating hoofbeats echoed away. In the silence, Lottie turned her head and found herself face to face with Chogan. Foreheads nearly touching, breaths mingling. "I've never fired a gun to miss on purpose," she said, nervous laughter releasing tension. "Missing sometimes saves you more than hitting," Chogan replied, amid something passed between them, something unspoken, deeper than gratitude. Chogan knew they could not stay. The posse would regroup with more men, more determination. He made a bold decision. Instead of fleeing deeper into wilderness, he would move into Thunder Creek itself, seeking allies. There were always a few people who valued justice over convenience. They traveled by night, moving slowly, reaching town at dawn on September 18th. The sky turned pale gray, first light touching building tops. Chogan led Lottie through back alleys where shadows were deepest, past trash bins and stacked crates, until they reached the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was white-painted wood with a bell tower and large windows facing Main Street. Charlotte, kind Kate Avery, the schoolteacher, was already awake preparing lessons. She was mid-30s with graying hair in a severe bun and a spine of iron forged by years standing up to bullies and ignorant parents. She saw them through the window and opened the back door immediately, ushering them inside and bolting it. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Kate said briskly, but not unkindly. Half the town wants to hang Chogan, other half wants to know what Mary's been hiding. There are rumors. What rumors? Lottie asked hoarsely. Sit, I'll explain. Roland the blacksmith arrived shortly, summoned by a boy Kate sent running. Roland was a Prussian immigrant, mid-40s, few words, but precise actions. Thick arms, calloused hands, scarred by forge work, reputation for honest dealing. He took Chogan's carbine, examining the bent sight. 1 hour to fix properly. Roland said accent-clipping words. But I can do it. Kate sent another boy, 10-year-old Sam, with quick mind and quicker feet, to fetch Dr. Ruth Hanley. Dr. Ruth arrived within the hour, medical bag in hand, expression stern and determined. She examined Lottie efficiently, cleaning a shoulder graze, a wound Lottie had not realized she had a bullet that came within inches. Dr. Ruth applied yarrow beeswax salve, then bandaged it with clean linen. Lucky, Dr. Ruth said briskly. Another inch left, this would have shattered your collarbone. You'd have lost arm use, probably permanently. I don't feel lucky, Lottie murmured. Dr. Ruth sat back, studying her. I've been investigating your father's case since his death. The mine claim homestead deed death circumstances. I have county record copies. There are things you need to see. She pulled a leather folder from her bag, spreading documents on Kate's desk. Lottie and Chogan leaned in. The first was Ernest's homestead deed filed with Maricopa County in 1875. It clearly named Charlotte Lottie Byrne as sole heir if no valid widow existed. The language was specific, legally precise, drafted by a Mercury Falls lawyer, a precaution Ernest took after Margaret's death. The second was a marriage license, yellowed, dated April 12, 1865, between Mary Kane and Walter Kane, recorded in Mercury Falls. It bore the territorial clerk's seal and 2 witness signatures. Lottie's hands shook. Mary was already married when she married my father. Bigamy, Dr. Ruth said flatly. Her marriage to your father was fraudulent, invalid under territorial law. That makes her homestead claim legally void. The land is yours, Lottie. Always was. Your father ensured that. Chogan's jaw tightened. Beckett knew. Of course, Dr. Ruth said, voice edged with anger. Beckett arranged it all. He wanted water rights. Without Ernest's homestead, he can divert the creek wherever he wants, expand, without complaints about poisoned water. Mary thought she'd inherit and sell for profit, sell you for cash, live comfortably. But the law's clear, she has no claim. Lottie felt the room spin, revelation crashing over her. Her father's dying words, keep the land, suddenly made terrible sense. He had known Mary's claim was false, had tried to protect Lottie's inheritance with his last breath. Dr. Ruth pulled out a telegram form, writing quickly. She handed it to Sam. Take this to the telegraph office now. Send to Marshal Harlow in Mercury Falls. Tell him to locate and detain Walter Kane as material witness in bigamy and fraud case. Tell him its urgent, lives depend on it. Go. Sam nodded seriously and ran out. But before anyone could speak, a boot kicked the door open. Sheriff Claude Trammell burst in, splintering wood near the latch. He was mid-40s with a substantial belly, straining his vest and a badge that gleamed dully. Elected with Beckett's money, everyone knew he served Beckett's interests. Come out, all of you, Trammell barked, hand on his Colt. Now. Kind Kate stepped forward with a broom. You have no right, Claude. This is a school. Trammell waved a crumpled paper. Got a warrant from Judge Perkins in Blackthorn for arrest of an Apache named Chogan for abduction and kidnapping, and for her vagrancy and conspiracy charges. Vagrancy, Dr. Ruth said sharply. She's legal heir to a 40-acre homestead, as these records show. and conspiracy to what Trammell ignored her, pushing past Kate roughly. He grabbed Chogan's arm. Chogan did not resist. Fighting would give Trammell excuse to shoot. Copper Jim entered behind the sheriff, smirking. He clubbed Chogan across the back of the head with his Colt barrel, delivered with casual brutality. Chogan staggered, blood running down his neck, soaking his collar. Lottie cried out and lunged forward, but Trammell grabbed her wrist and twisted viciously. Pain shot up her arm. "Damn you!" she hissed, glaring with cold fury. The school children at their desks began crying. Kate tried blocking the door with her broom, but Trammell shoved her aside hard enough to send her stumbling into a desk that overturned with a crash. They were dragged through Thunder Creek streets in daylight, past staring townspeople who whispered but did nothing. Some looked uncomfortable, but fear kept them silent. They were taken to the jail, a small stone building with barred windows. Chogan was thrown into one cell. Lottie was pushed into the adjacent cell. The cells were separated by iron bars, close enough to speak but not touch. The air smelled of old sweat, urine, despair. Chogan sat on the narrow cot, pressing his shirt hem to his head wound. Blood seeped through, dripping onto stone. Lottie tore another strip from her already tattered skirt and passed it through the bars. "Here," she said softly. "Please." Their fingers brushed as he took the cloth. Their eyes met through the bars. In that look was something unspoken: understanding, connection, trust, deepening into something more. Outside, Bison Bill made speeches, voice booming, rallying townspeople with tales of savage Indians and innocent white women. A telegram from Beckett arrived via Finch, offering an additional $50 to teach Chogan a lesson before trial. The promise of money and sanctioned violence drew men like moths to flame. The night was long and cold. Lottie sat with knees drawn to chest, listening to Chogan's breathing. His old shoulder wound had reopened, dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Are you all right?" she whispered. "I have been worse," Chogan replied, though pain threaded his voice. "Why did you help me?" Lottie asked. "You didn't know me. You risked everything." Chogan was silent and then spoke quietly. "I saw what she did to you. The bruises, the fear in your eyes. And I saw the water, the poison in the creek. Same poison that killed your father, killing my family. Beckett does not care who he destroys. White Apache makes no difference. He sees only profit. Someone had to say no. Someone had to act." Lottie closed her eyes, feeling truth settle over her. "I promised my father I would keep the land. But even with proof, Beckett has money and power and law on his side. What do we have?" "We have truth," Chogan said firmly. "And you do not fight alone. Remember that." Morning brought Dr. Ruth, Roland, and Kate with a desperate plan. Roland set a fire in the alley, using crates, kerosene, and brush. Flames crackled, sending black smoke visible for blocks. Fire was one of Frontier Town's greatest fears. Wooden buildings could burn to the ground in minutes. Deputy Mild Mike, a conflict avoider who took the job mainly for salary and free meals, rushed out back to fight the fire with a bucket. Kate slipped in the front, bringing a silver dollar and her persuasive voice. "Mike," she said gently, touching his arm when he returned from dousing flames. "You're a good man. You know this is wrong. Lottie suffered for years. Chogan only helped. Just look away for 1 minute. 1 minute, then you can say we overpowered you and no one will blame you." Mike hesitated, conscience warring with fear of Beckett and Trammell, sweat beading his forehead. Finally he nodded, shoulders slumping. 1 minute. Kate took the key ring and unlocked the cells. Chogan and Lottie stumbled out, bodies stiff from cold stone, muscles aching. "We need the schoolhouse," Dr. Ruth said urgently. "The papers are hidden under a floorboard. If Beckett's men find and destroy them, we're finished." They ran through alleys, footsteps quick and quiet hearts pounding. But Copper Jim, not a fool, had anticipated exactly this move. He and 3 riders burst into the schoolhouse through the front, just as they arrived through the back. Boots thundered on wood guns, cocked, filling air with menace. Chogan, weakened from blood loss, positioned himself in front of Lottie anyway, body as barrier. His vision swam, but resolve was iron. Roland handed Lottie his Winchester. "You know how to use this." "I'm learning fast," Lottie said, hands steadier now, fear transforming to anger. She loaded it with growing confidence. Copper Jim raised his pistol at Chogan's chest. "You're done, Indian. Girl's coming with us. Beckett's orders. This ends now." But Lottie aimed not at Jim. She aimed at the leather ledger that had fallen from Jim's saddlebag, now on the floor, pages splayed. She had glimpsed what was written. Names, dates, payments, destinations. Evidence of every woman Beckett sold through his trafficking scheme. Buyers' names, amounts exchanged. Systematic exploitation on paper. "You fire at him," Lottie said, voice cold and clear, cutting through tension, "and you'll split this town. Witnesses are outside right now, I hear them. I see faces in windows. This ledger has enough names to hang you Beckett Finch, every man involved. Territorial judges don't look kindly on human trafficking." She shifted aim to Jim's boot. "I can aim for your pride or your body, your choice. But if you kill him, you'll never leave this town alive. People here might fear Beckett, but they're not all cowards." Copper Jim hesitated, finger on trigger, but footsteps outside Kate had rallied not just parents, but shopkeepers and miners. Beckett had cheated, made him reconsider. Faces pressed against windows, watching, witnessing. The sense this moment was being observed and would be remembered, weighed against his planned violence. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his pistol face, twisted with rage. "This isn't over." "Yes," Dr. Ruth said, stepping forward with the deed and bigamy license held high. "It is. Walter Kane is on his way, escorted by Marshal Harlow. When he testifies, Mary's claim falls apart. Beckett's fraud will be exposed. All of you will face justice." But Sam burst through the side door, face flushed. "Telegram from Devil's Elbow. The wagon with other women. Beckett's men already took them there. Buyers are waiting. If we don't go now, those women disappear forever." Dr. Ruth's face hardened like stone. "Then we don't wait. We go to Devil's Elbow now. We stop this now, or it never stops." The journey to Devil's Elbow on September 19th was brutal and desperate. Heavy rains began falling, turning the sky, dark, bruised gray thunder, rumbling lightning, flickering. Rain swelled Thunder Creek into a churning torrent of muddy water, tearing at banks, carrying debris, branches, rocks, a dead coyote. The only crossing was a rope ferry at Sandbar, operated by old Toby, who charged a nickel per crossing and grumbled constantly. Chogan and Lottie rode the white mare together. Dr. Ruth followed in a wagon driven by Roland. Nidus rode alongside on a borrowed horse with an old muzzle-loader. Behind them, half a mile back but gaining, came Bison Bill's rider's determination, fueled by reward money. Bullets whined through rain, splintering willow branches. One struck a tree beside them with a sharp crack, sending bark flying. Another tore through Chogan's shirt, grazing his ribs, leaving a shallow burning cut that immediately bled. Lottie pulled the homestead deed from inside her blouse, where she had tucked it. She pressed it against Chogan's chest. "If I go under in that water," she said steadily, despite fear, face pale, "you keep riding. Take this to Judge Hargreave. Finish this. Promise me." "You are not going under," Chogan said fiercely, dark eyes boring into hers with absolute conviction. "I will not let you. We finish together or not at all." He checked the saddle cinch with one hand, ensuring it was secure, and boosted Lottie up with firm protective grip. His hands lingered at her waist for a moment, fingers pressing against her ribs in a gesture both practical and deeply intimate, a physical promise. Then he swung up behind her body, shielding hers from rain and gunfire. They reached the ferry as Dr. Ruth's wagon rattled up. Toby, seeing armed pursuers and hearing gunfire, began refusing face set in stubborn lines. "I ain't getting in no shooting match. Find another way." Dr. Ruth pulled a small derringer from her bag, nickel-plated barrel glinting in rain. She pointed it at Toby with steady hand face, calm, but eyes hard. "You'll take us across, Toby. Or I'll shoot your ferry rope right now and we'll all swim. Decide quickly." Toby stared and then muttered curses and began pulling the ferry across. The rope groaned under strained wooden platform, rocking dangerously as currents surged. Halfway across, the ferry tilted as a surge hit it. Everyone grabbed handholds. A rustling came from Dr. Ruth's wagon. The tarp shifted, and Walter Kane sat up slowly, coughing violently. He was 60-ish, thin face, like dried leather eyes, sunken. "Mary sent me away years ago." Walter rasped voice, barely audible over creek roar and pounding rain. "Paid me $50 to disappear, told me if I came back she'd have me killed. But Beckett's men found me 6 months ago. Told me keep quiet or they'd finish it." He pulled a folded paper from his coat with trembling hands, his marriage license to Mary Kane, yellowed but legible. "This is proof you need. This ends her lies." But Walter suddenly stiffened. He reached deeper into his coat, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Wait," he gasped urgently. "There's more. Letter. From Beckett's clerk, Finch. Drunk one night, bragged to me. Wrote it down. Proves Beckett sabotaged the mine timber. Murdered Ernest Byrne deliberately. Eliminating workers who asked questions. Bigger scheme. Water rights for railroad deal." A gunshot rang out sharp and sudden. Walter jerked eyes, widening, blood spreading across his chest. He fell back into the wagon bed, the marriage license and sealed letter slipping from his fingers. Dr. Ruth lunged, catching the marriage license. Roland, with reflexes honed by years of precise work, caught the letter just before it hit the wet planks. They looked up. Bison Bill's riders were on the far bank, Sykes lowering a smoking rifle with a satisfied smirk. Riders fired wildly now, bullets striking water with sharp splashes ricocheting off ferry planks. One tore through the rope just above the platform, sending hemp fibers flying. The ferry rocked violently, threatening to capsize. Chogan threw the ferry rope to Nidus, waiting on the far bank. Nidus caught it and tied it quickly to a thick cottonwood stump knots, tight hands moving with efficiency despite danger. The ferry swayed creek, surging, trying to tear it loose, but the rope held. They made it across just as the rope snapped with a sharp crack. The ferry broke loose and tumbled downstream, spinning, breaking apart planks, scattering. Toby cursed loudly, watching his livelihood disappear into brown, churning water. But he was alive. Walter Kane died on the wagon planks, blood mixing with rainwater, breathing shallow and rapid. His final words, whispered with last strength, were confession and apology. "Tell them. Mary's mine, always was. Legal wife, Ernest's death, no accident. Beckett ordered it, I knew. I should have spoken. I'm sorry. Sorry I was a coward." Dr. Ruth closed his eyes gently, hand lingering on his forehead in respect. She wrapped the marriage license and letter carefully in oilcloth to protect from rain, and they rode on toward Devil's Elbow. They reached Devil's Elbow as the sun began setting rain, slowing to drizzle, sky clearing slightly to reveal deep red and purple streaks. The pass was narrow and treacherous, flanked by steep rocky cliffs, covered in scrub brush and twisted junipers. A log bridge spanned a shallow rocky chasm where water from a seasonal stream trickled over smooth stones. On the far side, buyers waited with casual arrogance, men who believed themselves beyond law. Among them was Snakebite Sue, a gambler and madam in her 30s with sharp eyes and sharper tongue. She wore men's clothing trousers, vest, wide-brimmed hat, and carried a derringer in her boot. 3 cowhands stood with their saddlebags bulging with payment gold coins and banknotes the price of human lives. A freight wagon sat near the bridge canvas, tied securely. Muffled voices, women's voices frightened, calling for help, came from inside. The women Beckett sold Greta, a German immigrant with blonde braids, Paloma, a Mexican girl barely 16, and Maud, an Irish widow with red hair and fierce temper. Copper Jim arrived on a lathered horse face, twisted with fury and desperation. He knew if the women were freed and testified, if the ledger became evidence, if Lottie's claim was upheld, the entire operation would collapse, and he would face the rope. He aimed his rifle directly at Dr. Ruth, intending to silence her permanently before she could present evidence that would destroy everything. Chogan, moving with silent speed and precision, flanked by climbing through rocks on a steep ridge trail he had spotted. He positioned himself on a boulder overlooking the bridge carbine, steady despite injuries and exhaustion. He aimed not at Jim killing him would bring murder charges, but at the log bridge itself, at the rope supports holding it suspended. He fired once. The shot was precise result of years hunting. The rope snapped with a sharp twang, and the bridge tilted violently. 2 cowhands and Snakebite Sue, caught off guard, scrambled backward, lost footing, and plunged into the shallow, rocky chasm. They hit water and rocks with bone-jarring impacts, screams echoing off canyon walls, followed by splashing and cursing as they struggled in cold, rushing water. Roland, positioned on the opposite ridge with his Winchester, fired a single shot with craftsman's precise aim. The bullet struck Copper Jim's rifle stock, shattering it into splinters. Jim yelped and dropped the ruined weapon, staring at shattered wood in disbelief, hands stinging. Bison Bill arrived with the posse's remainder, but saw townspeople gathering on ridges around Devil's Elbow. Word had spread through Thunder Creek and beyond, carried by boys on fast horses and telegrams to neighboring settlements. People had come to watch, to witness, to see whether justice would prevail or Beckett's power was absolute. The crowd was silent, but attentive presence, a form of judgment. Vigilantes thrived in shadows, in absence of witnesses. Under scrutiny of dozens of eyes, knowing their actions would be remembered and discussed, Bison Bill's courage faltered. He backed his horse away slowly, hands raised in surrender, face pale. Lottie walked forward through rain and mud, homestead deed and bigamy license held high for all to see, voice carrying clearly across the past despite exhaustion. This deal was rotten from the start, she said, voice strong and unwavering, green eyes blazing. Mary Byrne has no legal claim to my father's land. Beckett has been poisoning our water and selling women like livestock, and I've got proof, all of it. She held up the sealed letter. And there's more. This letter proves Beckett murdered my father, deliberately sabotaged the mine timber. He's not just a thief, he's a murderer, and everyone here is witness. The buyers who had fallen climbed out dripping, bruised and furious, but fled on foot rather than face arrest, disappearing into wilderness. Copper Jim, disarmed and outnumbered, and facing witnesses, raised his hands in surrender, face a mask of rage and defeat. The women in the wagon, Greta, Paloma, and Maud, were freed bonds, cut faces, pale but relieved. They emerged into fading light, blinking, shaking, immediately wrapped in blankets by Dr. Ruth and Kate. In Thunder Creek, 2 days later, September 21st, Judge Thaddeus Hargreave, an honest man in his 60s, who had served the territory with integrity for 20 years, convened a hearing in the town hall. The room was packed with townspeople, ranchers, miners, even a few Apache observers standing silently in back. Judge Hargreave read documents carefully: the deed, the bigamy license, Walter Kane's recorded testimony, the letter from Finch proving Ernest's murder was sabotage ordered by Beckett, the ledger showing systematic trafficking. When finished, he set papers down and looked at the assembled crowd expression grave. "This is clear and unambiguous," Judge Hargreaves said, voice heavy with authority. Mary Kane's marriage to Ernest Byrne was fraudulent due to her prior undissolved marriage to Walter Kane. Under territorial law, this renders her homestead claim legally void. The property reverts to Charlotte Byrne, the named heir. Furthermore, evidence of human trafficking, conspiracy, and murder is overwhelming. He issued warrants immediately. Sheriff Claude Trammell was stripped of his badge and arrested for corruption, false imprisonment, conspiracy. He was led out in handcuffs, face red with humiliation. Roman Beckett, attempting to flee with saddlebags of gold, was stopped at town's edge by farmers armed with pitchforks, hoes, and a Spencer rifle. They blocked the road faces, grim, demanding fair water access, reparations for poisoned livestock, and ruined crops, end to intimidation. Beckett, facing an organized mob far angrier than vigilantes, had no choice but surrender. He was arrested and charged with fraud, pollution, conspiracy to commit trafficking and murder. County workers, supervised by Territorial Engineer Calloway, closed Beckett's diversion ditch, restoring Thunder Creek's natural flow. Water was murky at first, but Dr. Ruth organized a filtration system using charcoal, sand, and gravel, a method from a Boston medical journal. Crude but effective, removing sediment and some chemicals. Ayananitis and other Apache families, Yavapai and Tonto bands, who had refused reservations, came forward cautiously and helped build sluices and mercury traps to capture poison before it spread downstream. The knowledge they brought was ancient, passed through generations. The cooperation was fragile, built on necessity rather than trust, but it held. The freed women found paths forward. Greta found work as a seamstress in Mercury Falls. Paloma was reunited with family in Tucson through telegrams. Maud decided to stay in Thunder Creek and opened a small bakery with a loan from Roland, who admired her fierce independence. Mary Byrne appeared in court for sentencing, wearing a plain black dress, face composed and cold, showing no remorse. She denied everything to the end, but evidence was overwhelming. Judge Hargreaves sentenced her to 10 years in Yuma Territorial Prison for fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Copper Jim received 15 years for trafficking and assault. Several of Beckett's men, including Sykes and Dutch, received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. Bison Bill, who had not directly participated in trafficking, but led the illegal posse and encouraged violence, was fined heavily and barred from holding any authority position. Roman Beckett faced the most serious charges: fraud, environmental destruction, conspiracy to commit trafficking and murder. The territorial governor, alerted by Dr. Ruth's detailed report, sent via multiple telegrams, promised a full investigation examining not just Beckett's Thunder Creek operations, but his dealings across Arizona. Beckett would spend life in prison empire, dismantled name, a byword for greed and cruelty. Lottie stood in the courtroom when verdicts were read, Zephyr at her side. The boy's cough had eased significantly with clean water and Dr. Ruth's treatments. Color had returned to his cheeks, and he had gained weight. He looked up at his half-sister with trusting blue eyes. "What happens now, Lottie?" he asked quietly. Lottie knelt beside him, eyes level with his. "We go home, Zephyr, back to the homestead. It's ours now, legally ours forever. We'll fix the garden, repair the barn, plant new crops. We'll make it a good place again, the way Father wanted. And you'll go to school with Miss Kate, learn to read and write properly, arithmetic and history. You'll have a future. Will Chogan come with us?" Zephyr asked hopefully. Lottie glanced across the courtroom to where Chogan stood, shoulder freshly bandaged by Dr. Ruth, face still bearing bruises and cuts. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, needing no words. "I think he will," Lottie said softly, "if he chooses to." Among Ernest's papers hidden in the saddle tree hollow was a surveyor's note dated 3 years earlier, describing an unclaimed spring higher in the hills, 3 miles northeast of the burned homestead, fed by White Mountain snowmelt. The spring was on General Land Office property federally owned and available for public use under the Desert Land Act, if a community could prove need and file proper claims. The surveyor noted the spring produced an estimated 50 gallons per minute of clear cold water, year-round, more than enough to supply a small settlement or several homesteads. Lottie brought the note to Judge Hargreave, who examined it and consulted with Territorial Engineer Calloway. Within 2 weeks, a communal claim was filed, and work began on a system to bring spring water down to Thunder Creek. The town organized a massive effort, bringing together unlikely allies. Workers from Thunder Creek miners, ranchers, shopkeepers labored beside Pima and Yavapai workers from nearby settlements, together with Ayanna's Apache family and allies from other bands. They dug trenches, laid wooden pipes, built a large stone trough and hand pump in the town center. The cooperation was fragile, built on necessity and mutual recognition that water meant survival for everyone. Prejudices did not disappear. Whites still viewed Apache with suspicion. Apache remembered centuries of broken treaties. But for a time, common need created a working truce. The spring water flowed clear and cold, free of contamination. Thunder Creek gardens began blooming again. Livestock grew healthier. Children stopped coughing. The creek itself, with proper management and filtration, slowly recovered. Chogan and Lottie did not marry. Arizona Territory's laws against interracial unions were explicit and harsh, enforced with fines, imprisonment, social ostracism. Any official performing such a ceremony could lose their license and face prosecution. Prejudices ran deeper than laws. Most whites viewed such unions as abominations. Many Apache saw cooperation with whites as betrayal. But their bond was evident to anyone watching, visible in small, everyday acts that spoke louder than ceremonies or legal documents. Chogan repaired the homestead roof, replacing rotted shingles and sealing gaps where rain had leaked. He built a new chicken coop with scrap lumber and wire, ensuring hens were safe from predators. He treated the white mare's hoof when it grew tender, packing the sole with pine tar mixed with beeswax, his father's remedy, and wrapping it carefully until inflammation subsided. Lottie mended the tear in Chogan's shirt, where the bullet grazed him, stitches small and precise, fingers gentle. She learned from Ayanna how to make willow bark tea that eased pain and reduced fever, keeping a supply carefully labeled and stored. She cooked meals shared with Chogan, Ayanna, and Nidis, simple frontier fare like cornbread beans, stewed rabbit biscuits made with care. Together, they taught Zephyr to fish in the restored Thunder Creek, using willow poles and grasshoppers for bait. They showed him how to read, "Water, be patient, respect the fish," and take only what was needed. Chogan taught the boy to track animals by prints in mud, move quietly through forest, recognize edible plants. Lottie taught him letters and numbers using slate and chalk, kind Kate had given them. The homestead deed was locked in a tin box buried under cabin floorboards, with copies filed at the county land office and held by Judge Hargreave. Lottie's name was recorded in official territorial property records, creating a legal shield against future challenges. On warm evenings when work was done and sun descended toward mountains, Lottie and Chogan would often stand together near the creek, watching clear water flow. Sometimes they sat on porch steps, not touching but close shoulders, almost brushing silence, comfortable and companionable. One evening in late autumn, when air was cool and sky painted gold and crimson, Chogan lifted Lottie onto the white mare for a ride to check the upper fence line. It had become a familiar gesture, a way of easing strain on her still-healing ribs, a practical kindness. His hand lingered at her waist, fingers pressing gently against fabric. She leaned back slightly, resting weight against his chest, and for a moment they were still breathing in sync. "You don't have to carry all of it alone," she said softly, eyes on distant mountains. I will carry what is mine. Chogan replied, voice low and certain breath warm against her hair. And I will stand with you while you carry yours. That is enough. That is everything. It was not a declaration from songs or poems. It was something quieter, harder won, built on survival and trust and knowledge that they had faced the worst together and emerged stronger. The meadow stretched before them, golden in fading light, grass swaying gently. In the distance, Thunder Creek flowed clear and strong waters, no longer poisoned banks, no longer barren. The land was healing slowly but steadily, just as they were. Lottie and Chogan rode toward the horizon, not as fugitives or outcasts, but as partners bound by something deeper than law or tradition. They had kept the land as Ernest Byrne had asked. But more than that, they had found something neither expected to find in this harsh territory. They had found each other. And in a world defined by loss and hardship, that was more than most people ever found. It was a promise kept, a future built, a home reclaimed. Behind them, Thunder Creek settled into evening rhythms. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lanterns flickered in windows. Children played in yards, laughter carrying on wind. The world for a moment was at peace. And in that fragile peace, two souls broken by cruelty discovered that healing was possible, that justice could prevail, and that hope was not just a dream, but a promise kept solid as stone, clear as water, enduring as the land itself.